Welcome to Nightique. I'm Edward St. Pé. Well, it's the 10th anniversary of Katrina, and we've got the author of a new book about Katrina with us, NancyKay Wessman.
Hi, Edward.
Hello, Nancy. It's good to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us about, first off, before we go into your new book, you had a unique vantage point looking at what happened with Katrina because of your prior job, which you had just retired from. Tell us about that.
For 25 years, I was Communications and PR Director for the State Department of Health. This was the first hurricane that hit Mississippi in 25 years to which I personally did not respond. I'd retired a couple of years earlier, so I saw the storm from the perspective that the media showed us from my home in Fondren with my family. They were my job. Hurricane Katrina was not my job, and I was terribly frustrated by it because I knew the things that should be done that apparently were not being done. I took some national calls during that storm because my name was still on websites as the spokesperson for the State Department of Health. And I could get enough information from my colleagues who were still working in public health to accurately respond to those calls. But I didn't have anything really to do with the response or the recovery.
Well, tell us about your book. You were not part of the state in the response to Katrina, but you found a way to get involved with Katrina. Tell us about that.
2 years after the storm, Edward, I went down to the Gulf Coast to cover a story for Mississippi Medical News. I was freelancing then. That was my first vision of the destruction by Katrina. Miles and miles and miles and miles of nothing, where beautiful homes and vibrant businesses had been along Highway 90. All of that was gone. I talked to some of my public health colleagues who were still working, who were distraught because nobody had ever told their story. Dr. Bob Travnicek was district health officer over those 6 Gulf Coast counties. He was inside the Emergency Operations Center in Harrison County before, during, and for 100 days after the storm. And he was most upset that neither he nor his colleagues in that bunker had ever been asked what happened. What's your perspective of the story? As he and I talked, he persuaded me that the best public health thing I could do would be to tell their story.
And so you interviewed.
I interviewed probably 100 people. I had access to the situation reports from the Harrison County EOC. The people at Memorial Hospital of Gulfport gave me access to their records, shared their exhibits with me. And then I did that for about 2.5 years and thought I was ready to write the book, but I wasn't. My husband died, and that kind of took me out of the game for about 3 years. And when I got back to interviewing, to finishing the interviews of the people on the state level, MEMA's executive director, Robert Latham, said, "Nancy, you can't write this book until you go to Hancock County." I hadn't been to Hancock County, but I went. And meeting with Brian Adam, whom everybody knows as Hootie, in Hancock County totally transformed the direction of the book. Hootie he was just bubbling over, ready to tell his story. He brought out photo albums, numerous photo albums of the pictures that he took after the storm, and started identifying people in their community I must interview. So over the next 2 or 3 months, I interviewed as many as we could, and they added tremendously to the detail that's involved in this book.
Well, I'm holding the book up, Katrina, Mississippi, Voices from Ground Zero. So these are the voices of the people that actually were on the ground working.
These are voices of people who were responsible for emergency preparedness for their local governments. The people in the city, particularly the county, the EOC directors in the counties. It's a funny thing, Joe Spraggins was supposed to start his new job as Director of Emergency Management for Harrison County in Gulfport on August the 29th. He had no idea.
And the thing about Katrina, if we can go to a satellite shot of Katrina, it was so huge. It was such a huge storm. Basically, it was covering just about the whole Gulf. And we remember it as being a catastrophe for Louisiana, and it actually hit the Gulf Coast. The eye passed across Mississippi's coast.
The double eye wall came almost up the Bay of St. Louis, between the Bay of St. Louis and the state line, the Pearl River. Waveland, Bay St. Louis, ground zero. And most of the rest of the world does not know that.
You know, Louisiana got the backside of it, and of course the big event there was the fact that the levees broke,
Right.
and so we had this great flood. But the true impact of the eye slowly rumbling across, that was felt in Mississippi. And as we were talking before we went on the air, it was just devastating. The whole coast was, in many cases, wiped clean, right?
That's true.
And
The Gulf Coast was ground zero,
Ground zero.
and people who looked at that ground zero the next day from the air describe it as a zone that looked like toothpicks had been thrown down, because everything was shattered to pieces. Everything was moved. To a large extent, everything between the water and the railroad track, which runs parallel to the water line for the most part, wiped out, moved, slabbed.
even huge casinos were lifted up and tossed to the side.
That's what's on the front cover of my book. This is the Copa barge that the...
So that was one of the casinos
that's
there.
one of the casinos.
And it was...
And that's looking from the foot of Highway 49 northward. So that you see on this, it's kind of interesting, the bunker is just in this upper right quadrant of this photograph. That's where the emergency responders in Harrison County were located from 5 days before the storm. That's where they locked themselves in to be protected, to be safe. But even they weren't sure that they were.
Well, I want to ask you some questions about some of the first responders and the information they gave you, and we'll take a look at all of that when we come back from the break, okay?
Great, thank you.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. This is Nightique.
When you are looking to further your education, there's only one university that towers above the rest, Jackson State University. Jackson State University is one of the leading universities in research, technology, and innovation, graduating more than 1,300 students annually and a consistent growth in revenue. Jackson State University is ranked #1 amongst the HBCUs in research and development. Make the right choice, the one choice, one Jackson State University, changing lives one student at a time.
Ingalls Shipbuilding is hiring electricians, structural welders, machinists, ship fitters, pipe fitters, and pipe welders in our Pascagoula, Mississippi site. Signing bonuses available for pipe welders only. Positions are union represented. Come build your career with Ingalls Shipbuilding. Go to www.huntingtoningalls.com/careers or call 888-935-1507. Well, we're talking to NancyKay Wessman, and she's the author of a new book about Katrina. It's Katrina, Mississippi, Voices from Ground Zero. And we were talking about the fact that the Katrina, the eye rumbled right across the coast of Mississippi.
It did.
Louisiana got the backside, but we got the actual eye wall pushing across, and it was slow and gigantic, and it did great devastation to the coast. So you interviewed a lot of the first responders. Tell us some of the interesting stories that you learned.
Joe Spraggins was director of the Emergency Management Agency in Harrison County. His first day on the job was August 29, 2005. Fortunately, he had the foresight to go into work 3 or 4 days early to begin to acquaint himself with all of the staff and with the plans, with what they already had in place. This was not an entirely new rodeo for Joe, though. He had been in the military for about 30 years. He was retiring as a brigadier general and as base commander at the base there in Gulfport. So he was a little bit savvy about what was going on. Probably the most important thing he had done before he even took the job was to develop a one-on-one collegial relationship with each of the members of the Board of Supervisors and with all the other county employees, as many as he could. When he went into that center as director, he went with the backup of the people for whom and with whom he worked. So he indeed could be the commander, General Spraggins. As time went on, and after the full brunt of the storm slammed into Mississippi's Gulf Coast, as those people worked day and night for weeks without end inside that center. He knew that they would get on each other's nerves, that nothing big maybe would blow up. Nevertheless, he instilled what he called the hatchet theory. It's a reminder to everybody there that if you throw a hatchet and it meets its target, that target's not going to be useful to you anymore. So he said, we will not throw any hatchets in this room. And they didn't. One of the best things that came from Katrina, one of the best lessons learned, is that people can and must work together. All disasters, especially catastrophic disasters like Katrina, are local. And all involve public health. Because all are local, the local people have to be the first line of defense for the rest of us. Now, that local disaster in Mississippi went from the waters of the Gulf Coast all the way to Meridian and included the city of Jackson and all the metro area. We took a real hit here.
Yeah.
But we were not devastated the way the coast was. We were
Right.
not washed away.
Well, even in Jackson, I remember our project Weather Vision that supplies weather to TV stations. Up until that point, we had never been off the air. I mean, every day for since 1990, we've been feeding television stations and doing feeds for the networks from our studio. We were down after the Katrina passed, and we were down for, it might have been a week, which was an extraordinarily long time to be sitting around waiting for the electricity to come back.
Right.
It was pretty rough.
It's rough, and it makes you feel like you have absolutely no power.
Right.
No personal power.
Right.
Not even to mention electricity.
You know, a lot of the aftermath of Katrina, when we look back at the press, it was seemingly a disaster, not only in Louisiana from the standpoint of the flood, but the politics involved, and it was a debacle in many ways, from the governor back down to the mayor of New Orleans. We didn't experience that in Mississippi, did we, as far as that type of rancor after the event?
I heard Governor Barber do a reading for his new Katrina book the other night, and he talked about that very thing. I think it was Friday or Saturday when MEMA became the center command post for the whole state of Mississippi. The local people and the state people turned to Governor Barber as our executive leader and said, we're all in this together. Ultimately, you must make the call. The buck stops with you, and we will follow your lead. At the same time, Governor Barber looked to the people who know emergency preparedness and said, give it your best shot, tell me what we need to do, and we'll move in that direction. Another good thing that we had going for us in Mississippi was that Governor Barber was good friends with President Bush and with Governor Bush in Florida. If not for Governor Jeb Bush in Florida at that time, Mississippi would have been without far longer than we were without, because we learned during the process of the response operations 4 or 5 days after the storm, no supplies had begun to come into Mississippi even then. Some of the FEMA people who were on the ground and ensconced in the local counties before landfall were able to communicate with their state, with the Florida EMA director, who was sitting beside Governor Jeb Bush, and they turned supplies to coming to Mississippi.
Wow. So yeah, that explains it right there. And in Louisiana, it was a very bad situation. A lot of pointing and name calling, and a lot of rancor, I would say.
Before the storm hit, General Spraggins went around the room in the bunker there in Gulfport and asked all of the people who were in their response positions, and it's set up like a big NASA center, 30 or 36 various positions. Dr. Bob Travnicek was at the public health position. General Spraggins wanted to know, what's your objective? What do you want to achieve in this response? And Travnicek's a little bit wonky, kind of a mad scientist, but he stood there and looked around the room. He said, I want to avoid social unrest. And everybody just started scratching their head. What the heck is he talking about? What does he mean? We've got a hurricane coming at us. And he said, if social unrest comes into being, you've lost control of everything. We maintain social dignity and social stability during that whole storm event. Louisiana,
No.
judge for yourself.
It was just the opposite, it seems like.
Right.
You know, a lot of, you know, crime, a crime wave among, you know, other ailments. It was a disaster.
Mississippi had some looting, but one of the things that I was surprised about, that you can read about in my book, is that very quickly after the storm, to prevent anybody who shouldn't be south of the railroad tracks to getting in there, General Spraggins was able to get $1.4 million worth of razor wire and string it from west to east across Harrison County. The local people were in charge of who had access to the devastated areas. They were protecting not only the people who would have gone in and might have gotten into debris piles or gotten cut or otherwise wounded or become sick from being in close contact with all the destruction, the debris, the contagion that the storm left behind. But it also protected the destroyed belongings of the people who lived south of the railroad tracks.
Right.
That was a very important move on his part. And then after the storm, as the days came, you know, the heat didn't go away. The temperature on the Gulf Coast that week was well over 90 degrees. Tons of seafood and poultry and pork bellies and fruit that had been in cargo containers in the port of Gulfport were washed ashore, turned upside down, tumbled. Something had to happen with all of that. Dr. Bob Travnicek, as county health officer, had the power and the courage to condemn all of that nasty, rotten food and to have it moved. That prevented disease outbreaks. All the pumps for the sewer system in Harrison County failed. They had no potable drinking water. They had no electricity. It took several days and a lot of hard work on the part of the public works people to restore those sewage pumps into operational capacity. One of the things that Dr. Travnicek had to do was make sure that the sewers did not start pumping, that the water was not turned on until the sewers had regained the ability to pump. He preached sewers before water, sewers before water. Because if they had started the water flowing before the pumps were repaired, they would have had sewage all over the streets. They would have pumped it into downtown Gulfport, more than had happened just during the surge of the storm itself.
It was an amazing sight to see that.
It was a dirty place.
It was, I tell you, it was unforgettable. Okay, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. And stay tuned. This is Nightique.
Bengal presents From One Legend to Another.
Good day. I must say I've deduced that Bengal roach spray is a superior product. It's kept all traces of those vile creatures from my home. Which lets me focus on more meaningful pursuits.
People trust Bengal Roach Spray's legendary performance. No odor, no mess, no roaches. Bengal Roach Spray really works.
With Bengal, I love having a little more me time.
When you are looking to further your education, there's only one university that towers above the rest, Jackson State University. Jackson State University is one of the leading universities in research, technology, and innovation, graduating more than 1,300 students annually and a consistent growth in revenue. Jackson State University is ranked #1 amongst the HBCUs in research and development. Make the right choice, the one choice. One Jackson State University, changing lives one student at a time.
Ingalls Shipbuilding is hiring electricians, structural welders, machinists, ship fitters, pipe fitters, and pipe welders in our Pascagoula, Mississippi site. Signing bonuses available for pipe welders only. Positions are union represented. Come build your career with Ingalls Shipbuilding. Go to www.huntingtoningalls.com/careers or call 888-935-1507.
Well, we're here with the author of a new book, Katrina, Mississippi, Voices from Ground Zero, and it is the 10th anniversary of Katrina. And we've got NancyKay Wessman with us, and it's been very interesting to talk to you because you interviewed the first responders the guys on the ground, right at Ground Zero as Katrina hit and afterwards. So you have a lot of unique insight into what those fellas saw. Any other anecdotes you want to mention from your extensive interviews with those folks?
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the champions of the storm. Rupert Lacey was a deputy sheriff who became the logistics officer. Gary Hargrove was there in his role as coroner. He's been coroner for decades there now. Those two people, Bobby Weaver, who had been director of the Sand Beach Authority, became the operations manager for the Harrison County people. Over in Hancock County, Brian Hootie Adam was in charge, but his county administrator, Tim Keller, was right there alongside him. The stories in Hancock County are very different from Harrison County because those Hancock Countyans nearly drowned during the storm. Their operations center was a repurposed bowling alley, and that bowling alley took on water. The people who were in there, some 35 people, stayed behind. They volunteered to stay behind, even though FEMA and MEMA had ordered them to evacuate. Hootie Adam would not leave because he knew his responsibility was to the people of Hancock County. They did not stay. They wrote their Social Security numbers on their bodies in case they were washed out or became calamitous event their own selves. It was a riveting story on their part. The people in Memorial Hospital at Gulfport kept working throughout the storm. They lost power. They used flashlights. They used the lights on their cell phones to get around. They continued doing surgery. And then after the storm, after the melee moved on and all was quiet and hot and steamy again and people began to come outside and to see the utter destruction, there's some good stories in that. There's one chapter about a family of 3 who were washed out of their home about 2 blocks from the water in Gulfport and who actually roof surfed to remain alive. It's a riveting story. As people were, when federal help finally came and people were discovered as survivors of the storm and brought to the hospital for emergency care, one particularly amazing little story is of a woman who was picked up from her bed. She was in her 2nd floor home, her bedroom, stayed in her bed, was not able to evacuate, lived alone, washed out onto the roof of her home, and somehow managed to stay there through the worst of the storm. The helicopter picked her up from her bed, brought her to Memorial Hospital, and when the team greeted her at the landing site, she had her rosary in one hand and a bottle of Southern Comfort in the other. She was well prepared.
She was having a hurricane party.
That's right. And that's an interesting, amusing story, but it's a story of strength and resilience and determination. And that's the story that you really get to see throughout the book, because the people of Mississippi came together. Immediately after the storm, they looked like zombies. They were wandering around Gulfport and Bay St. Louis and Waveland trying to find their footing again. But they knew that it was up to them. And they accepted that responsibility to get back on their feet, to clean up, to help each other, to rebuild stronger and better.
Well, the book is available. It's Katrina, Mississippi, Voices from Ground Zero, NancyKay Wessman, and it's available at Amazon.
It is.
And at Lemuria.
And other fine booksellers throughout the state.
And other fine booksellers throughout the state. And if you want to get a real bird's eye view of what the first responders encountered at Ground Zero, this is a book that can bring you up to speed. And you know, as you were mentioning, the history of Katrina, although it's a terrible story, the resiliency of Mississippi breaks through.
That's the real story.
That's the real story.
That's the real story.
Yeah,
that's the story that most of the world doesn't know, because
right.
they don't know that Katrina hit Mississippi.
Right, right. Thank you for coming, NancyKay.
Thank you for having
And good
me.
luck with the book, and we hope to have you back on with your next book, okay?
I'd love to be. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us on this edition of Nightique.
Yeah, I'm a roach whisperer. I've just always had a way with them. Now, roaches are stubborn, nasty insects, and sometimes you just gotta be forceful with them. Ah, roach, be gone. You're not welcome here, roach.
There is a better way. Bengal Roach Spray. No odor, no mess, no roaches. Bengal Roach Spray really works.
And if whispering don't work, I always got my backup plan.
Ingalls Shipbuilding is hiring electricians, structural welders, machinists, ship fitters, pipe fitters, and pipe welders in our Pascagoula, Mississippi site. Signing bonuses available for pipe welders only. Positions are union represented. Come build your career with Ingalls Shipbuilding. Go to www.huntingtoningalls.com/careers or call 888-935-1507.